Day 255. The commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian armed forces reported that Russian forces had tripled the intensity of hostilities. Most of their attacks are taking place in eastern Ukraine, and from yesterday until today, the loudest part of the front line became the segment between Siversk and Bakhmut. The main goal of Russian troops here is to seize Bakhmut and Soledar. The spokesperson of the Ukrainian Eastern Group, Serhiy Cherevatый, stated that in the light of continuous defeats, the political situation inside Russia is steadily becoming more and more pessimistic about the war, so the Russian officials are desperate to achieve political victories. That is why they're willing to sacrifice a lot of men for very small territorial gains in the Donbas area, because this way they can announce that they are successfully liberating the Donetsk region and achieving their objectives. This is something we talked about yesterday. I told you that according to the Institute for the Study of War, the Russians made a mistake. They sacrificed so many unprepared men in vain, while if they had waited a little bit longer, their success could have been greater. However, political goals often take precedence over military goals. Decreasing tension inside the country at any cost may be of a much higher priority than being prudent on the ground. After all, if the tension reaches a tipping point, everything may fall apart from within, including the army. That is why they are temporarily expanding their army at a higher rate to ensure that they will stay in power and reserve a chance of winning the war in the long run. Unfortunately for the Russians, it did not work out very well, and they ended up losing even more ground. For the last 2 days, intense fights have been breaking out in the Siversk direction. In the first wave of assaults, the Russians attacked Bilohorivka and Verkhnokamiansk. Here the Russians seem to have regained control over Zolotarivka, which they lost several weeks ago. This way they secured the northern part of the oil refinery and improved their tactical position. Nonetheless, their area of control over the region only expanded a little, because the Ukrainians had been establishing more and more defensive positions around Bilohorivka. In the second wave of assaults, the Russians also assaulted Spirne and southern Bilohorivka. This is where Russian tactical positions significantly deteriorated. Those who have been watching my reports since August might remember that previously the fights were taking place in Vanodarivka and even Vyimka and Vasela. The fact that the fight shifted to Spirne indicated that the Ukrainians successfully pushed the Russians at least 8 kilometers back. Moreover, after repelling the Russian attack on the southern Bilohorivka, the Ukrainians launched a counterattack on Berestove, from where the Russians launched their attack. The Russians were unprepared and, according to some sources, entirely abandoned the village, while according to others, they partially withdrew and now the fights are taking place inside the village. In any case, the Russians here lost control over 50 square kilometers of the ground. When it comes to the southern part of the region, yesterday I told you that the Russians had conducted a massive artillery preparation. The goal of it was to damage Ukrainian defense infrastructure, undermine the defense overall, to open a window for an underground attack. And today they launched this attack. The first 2 attacks were directed towards Kurdyumivka and Klishivka. The goal here is to fix Ukrainian troops, because as I told you in one of my previous reports, the Ukrainians have recently reinforced the southern part of Bakhmut with several mechanized brigades. Leaving this area undisturbed would simply invite the Ukrainians to conduct a flank attack once the Russians launched their main attacks. And their main attacks were directed towards Opetne and Ivangrad. So far there is no information regarding the progress. However, the spokesperson of the Ukrainian Eastern Group already noted that a significant number of Russian casualties and captives are newly mobilized men. Heavy engagement of forces that are not fully prepared for the fight once again explains a spike in Russian losses. The Russians have also attacked Bakhmut from the north using the same strategy. Firstly, they launched an attack on the village of Bakhmutske to keep Ukrainian troops busy, and then launched a second attack towards the champagne factory that they lost in the aftermath of the Ukrainian counteroffensive. Ukrainian General Staff reports that so far, Russian attacks here have been repelled, but given the overall situation in the east, the Ukrainians can expect more attacks to come in this direction. According to the Institute for the Study of War, the increased quantity of personnel at frontline positions may allow Russian forces to achieve some gains in Donetsk Oblast, but poor training, logistics, and the command will continue to prevent Russian forces from making operationally significant gains that would materially affect the course or outcome of the war. Good news is also coming from the British Ministry of Defense. According to their intelligence, the Russians have started deploying blocking units that threaten to shoot their own retreating personnel and deserters. This is not surprising, because the Russian administration has been continuously enacting stricter and stricter laws regarding capitulation and desertion, so these problems are not new, and they're obviously exacerbated when the troops are sent to storm powerful positions with very high losses. Overall, the situation in the east is very intense, but so far, the Ukrainians somehow managed to not only hold defense, but also gain ground. If you're against the invasion of Ukraine and you want to support the work that I'm doing,